Now to open the closing government case, now I invite member of government to the podium.
Mr. Speaker, whenever you see society, when people of power want to retain that power, as you can see in aristocracies and monarchies, the first thing they do is to deem the public stupid and try to lead them out. We believe that it's time that we take away the judicial aristocracy from the Supreme Court and return the Constitution back to who it really belongs. A democracy is owned by the people, and we believe that the Constitution is the spirit of that nation. It's time that we gave it back to its rightful owners. As a closing government, we are very dissatisfied with the opposition today. They come up here and say that if you do this, you're going to have a bad time. The minorities are going to have such a bad time. Without really understanding the concept that if you look at history, it was never the judiciary that was the champions that shifted and changed people's perception. It was not the judiciary that supported minorities. It was the public, the people. It was people that were brave enough, such as Malcolm X. It was people of the female suffrage movement that made such a ruckus that people in power had to shake in their thrones and had to eventually concede and give away. We believe that this doesn't happen enough. We think that people like Scalia is too comfortable in her little seat in the Supreme Court. We do not think that the citizens of a democracy are the third parties. We think that these people that are not elected, that are appointed, are not accountable, are the third parties when it comes to decide the norms and the justices of the society that we live today. So, revolt. We talk about interpretation. If you look at the American Constitution, for instance, ladies and gentlemen, it says that all men are born equal. In the genesis of the Constitution, this meant white, rich, straight males as men. Only after there was a bit of a social problem did it go down to white, straight males. After a bit of a ruckus of the civil rights movement, it became straight males. And after the recent movement of other things, such as the gay rights movement, it finally became males. And finally, men are now, not because the constitutional founding fathers necessarily were smart and nice, but because society has evolved to accept that it is not just the white, straight, upper rich males that are the citizens of this country. It is us, the people. And now men means everyone. We think that this was not made by 9 people high and mighty. It was the people here. It was the democratic system that forced these people out of these positions, so please sit down. It was not the minorities that were suffering because of the laws that were voted by the majority. It was the powers of government, their audacity to think that they could get away with this that was caused. And it was always the people that were having to shed blood and their riches and their privileges. And we afford all of these rights, not to the judges, but to our forefathers that fought for those changes of the Constitution. We think that it is time that we take this away. Please sit down. Our extensions are simple. Ladies and gentlemen, first extension is that we will prove to you why judges are oh so not fit to understand the society and the current systems of justice that we have today. Second argument, we'll also talk about the fact I am signposting. We'll also talk about how the interpretation of the Constitution, as the opening government said, is vague and therefore should be reflective. Law is not supposed to be static. Law is supposed to reflect and be flexible. And third, we will also tell you how this has also saved bloodshed. But before I go on,
okay, how is it fair when majority makes a controversial issue and majority votes on that issue?
Why do you let people vote for the president if that is the case? And second thing, you are so worried about rich people. You know that Mitt Romney has a $50,000 per head capita fundraiser? I'll tell you something. He's not going to get elected, so don't vote for him. It's not money that makes the power. It's the people's consciousness that creates justice. When he goes and says that 47% of the Americans are dickheads and that rely too much on the government, he's not going to get elected no matter how many rich friends he has. No. First argument. If you look at the echelon of the judicial system, you can see that Harvard graduates, Seoul National University students, most of these judges are bred in a system of elitist judicial systems where they are educated how to interpret the laws and especially the Constitution. These are formed by the elites of the political system of those times, and they are educated and they're graded and they are valued upon how well you follow that interpretation of the elites. We believe, number two, no matter how many crazy things you do in the Supreme Court, you're not kicked out, so you do not have accountability. You're simply picked, and then you kind of stay there. The third problem is therefore that these people in their high towers do not understand what goes on. A LGBT member gets lynched and says, oh, the Constitution says it's fine. They do not understand what it means when a poor person no longer can support his family and says, like, no, we have so much money. We think that these people are the most ill-fit people, to decide on constitutional matters. Constitution is not strictly just criminal law or civil law. It is the basis of how we accept and understand the liberties of this land. And it should therefore be reflected on the people of the land. Not 9 people in their ivory towers that are the most disconnected with society and do not care to look at it because they don't have job security problems because they fail to do this basic role. Second extension, ladies and gentlemen, we also told you therefore that if you look at the interpretations of historical issues, it was always that the Constitution lagged behind social conception. They make it sound as if we let this happen, that all of the people will go back into lynching minorities. No, it was the people at large that made the social conception first. The controversial aspect is always when you see injustice not being solved. When your legislators are dickheads, they don't do what they're supposed to do. When your executive is powerless and the judiciary is up there. That's when society considers something controversial, and that's when they force these people to go through. It's not a time issue. You don't enforce and educate, you follow. We think it's time that therefore the third extension. What was the price of this? If you look at the people that had to suffer, there were people that were killed. There were people that fought wars. There were people at Gwangju that had to risk their life, their liberty, and their blood to change the issues at hand. Do we really need to repeat this aspect of history over and over again because we are still not ready to give out that piece of constitution that allows the debate framework of the future of the society we live on 9 people up there? Or is it time that we actually take democracy seriously? Understand that laws of the land is in the power of the people, don't have to go and get assassinated to make a change, but actually ask the people, what is the justice that you accept for this land? And actually stop people from dying for doing this. For these reasons, we're proud to propose. Thank you.
So I'm going to call the opposition. Now I'd like to call for member opposition to the podium.
Mr. Speaker, what we think we've heard from the entire government bench are nice stories, right? There is injustice right now and people need to solve it. We think it's very easy burden for you to say, there's a problem, there's necessity, solve it. The real burden that you had to solve is why the controversy that you talk about, if it's under such a dead law, how or is it better solved by the referendum mechanism? How is it better settled by the ideas that you actually bring out? We don't think it was any analysis from both opening and closing for you to say that right now judges are stupid or judges are dumb, therefore suddenly leave it up to the public and therefore they will solve it, but somehow even if the decision is shed, at least you did it, therefore you will accept it. We think that's the logic that's coming from the entire government bench. We think that was very, very contaminated with the idea that I have to do everything for myself. We don't think that's what democracy is about. Before that, before I go into any of the important things, right, the most important part of the closing opposition is 2 things. Number one, I'm going to actually talk about why controversy worsens. First extension is going to deal with the credibility of the process of decision-making of referendum itself, why that's not legitimate, why that does not bring about credible decisions and consequences in society. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the true concept of representative democracy. We don't think that democracy is about you having power to do every single thing that you possibly can. We don't think that's a good democracy, neither is it the status quo. You have misrepresented what democracy is about. Before that, let's have a look at the opening. Opening government basically talked about the idea that, you know what, like judges are stupid because they're elitists, right? We think when it comes to lobbyists, right, we don't think lobbyists always equals bribery or lobbyists always equals elitist, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because number one, we see competing interest groups do already exist in status quo. Even for the minority groups, there are interest groups to represent those guys. So if you don't like the idea of direct democracy, then you really shouldn't elect even your president or nobody, because you're not willing to accept the consequences of that election. Because right now what you're saying is, when you vote for a president, or when you have the right to vote, there is inherent that agreement that you will accept the consequences of that election. Even if you voted for a party that didn't win that election, too bad, you have to suck it up and you have to put up with that for 4 more years, or you have to push the government in a different way that's already provided in status quo. What exactly are those mechanisms? We already have media, we already have public scrutiny to take care of bad decisions that are already made by the government, at least, Mr. Speaker. We already say that the idea of lobbyists, Mr. Speaker, is not really that simple and elitist as you guys say. Why? 2 types of lobbies. Number one, direct lobby, where these elitists have power or a personal network with these legislative or judicial branches. But more than that, indirect lobbying actually deals with more bottom-up changes, creating or more mobilizing of society. We think when it comes to indirect lobbying, these guys, what they do is they mobilize citizens. They actually trigger awareness, and we think these guys are in better position to do so because I, as a citizen, have never given a mandate for another citizen to make decisions on behalf of me. I give mandate to my government to make decisions for me. I give mandate to my president to elect the right judges. I don't give that mandate to fellow citizens. That's what you're promoting right now. But before that, opening.
Exactly, madam. That mandate never happened when people had no say in choosing these justices and the decisions that these justices impose on people.
That mandate is there. That follows every decision that the ruling party makes. What you're basically saying is, I'm not happy with the ruling party. I actually don't like the result of the election. Therefore, I'm going to challenge it by me or involving me directly in that particular process. We don't think that's what democracy is about. We don't think that's the status quo. No, thank you. Last thing, I'm going to talk about exactly what they didn't actually prove. How exactly is this settling controversy? We think the opening opposition did a decent job in terms of providing why it creates division, not consensus. We think your burden to prove is when there is a controversy that cannot be solved in status quo by self-correction, then how exactly is it solved by referendum? The idea and the concept of vote that is that ideas are divided, not reaching a consensus, Mr. Speaker. So when I voted for something, and as you know, obvious by you guys, if you don't accept the result, then you will continue to believe that gays shouldn't have rights, then you will continue to believe that I should have guns, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that idea of legitimacy and acceptance of result comes when referendum is involved. Let's move on to the extension. No. First thing, I'm going to prove to you why the decision-making process is going to be tainted when you leave it up to the public, Mr. Speaker. First thing, let's have a look at what's going to happen. We think it's very simple for the government side to say, right? People debate, people have discussion, and people reach this productive discussion, like constructive feedback, therefore everybody will agree. No, we think open opposition side already told you the idea of populism, right? But I'm going to extend that much more because I need to extend that, right? Because they've done a good job. Right, what basically happens is, when you see the idea of voting, when you see the idea of reaching a consensus or even majority, what happens is you don't collect ideas, you don't debate about ideas, you collect a number of heads, you collect a number of people simply so that you have the necessary number of votes to outvote the other party or outvote the other idea. What exactly is the danger in this? Number one, we think it's an assumption for the government to say that everybody is interested in this particular controversy, that everybody has full comprehension of this particular controversy. When it comes to LGBT issues, when it comes to guns, I'm not interested, Mr. Speaker. Or people like me that are neutral or impartial against this issue, or especially people that are susceptible to populism or smear campaigns.
what happens at the end, the biggest harm under your model, is the people you end up hurting are the people that are in the middle of that particular controversy. For example, LGBT, right? You end up hurting gays because there are people going out there saying that gays are stupid, therefore you should never vote for gays. And when it comes to gun nuts, right? The gun nuts are violent and cruel, therefore you should scrutinize and actually hate them, right? That's the kind of thing that happens. And the people you end up hurting under your model are people that are involved in that particular issue. Do they really want this? We don't think so, Mr. Speaker. Second extension, representative democracy. What exactly is it, Mr. Speaker? I'm going to also deal with the idea of law under this particular thing. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to individual votes, we think individuals are limited in terms of looking at big picture. That's why we think top-down policies are sometimes better than core, simplistic, bottom-up approach of I get to say whatever I want, and that has to be reflected in the result, Mr. Speaker. Why? Two things. Number one, we think when it comes to credibility and legitimacy, because I've never given a mandate for another citizen to decide the fate of how our country is run, but I simply do that by voting, Mr. Speaker, the credibility of that decision simply goes down, especially worsens when you don't agree with the decision itself. What happens is, then the compliance to the law, or the compliance of the ruling party itself actually decreases, feeling that they feel this consequence of this decision was made by people that don't have any capacity to make right decision, Mr. Speaker. That's why the current controversy is not being solved in status quo. That's why people aren't agreeing, Mr. Speaker. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, we don't think law is something that should fluctuate depending on popular ideas, Mr. Speaker. We think law is very special. Constitution is very special in the sense that it needs to have a stability within it, Mr. Speaker. According to your stance, if you don't like it, you go out and make a fuss out of it. It changes every time according to the popular atmosphere of that particular society. We don't think Constitution should fluctuate according to the mood of the society. That's why we think top-down approach is crucial in this debate. What have we contributed on the closing opposition side? We tell you that it's not simplistic. You still have a lot of burden to prove on the Junbin side, so good luck with that. But second of all, we told you, representative democracy is not about doing everything you can. For those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Now I call for government speaker to the podium.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk about three things in my whip speech today. Number one, is this popular referendum go along with the principle of democracy, and does it uphold democratic principle, which is the ultimate goal of this debate that both sides want to uphold? Number two, regarding the minority right, is minority really harmed regarding policy that we propose to you? Number three, what are the social ramifications, especially on the unique harm that closing government provided to you regarding the conflict of the matter? So firstly, regarding the principal justification, I gave you in my POI that if those judges in Supreme Court cannot make consensus on their own, those people vote as well. For example, in the individual mandate clause of Obamacare, when it was appealed to Supreme Court, the decision was 5-4 towards that the Obamacare individual mandate was going along with the Constitution. We think when those judges also vote, even in the status quo, simply expansion of that mechanism and expansion of that toward the nationalistic level and toward the state level does not harm the status quo. But moreover, we point you to the fact that state already provides along with the principle of democracy, the people the right to vote, legislative people and executive people. We have presidential elections and other forms of elections. So we think that the principle that we stand is clearly upheld even under the status quo and goes along with the democracy principle of democracy. Then Hannah wanted to say that democracy is not about direct involvement, because by electing those presidents and electing those people who ultimately appoint those judges, you are yielding your power to do that. We think when those people who we elect and accepted and agree to yield our power do not function properly as we have expected, Mr. Speaker, when they do not act upon our own trust, we think that the state also needs to provide the authority to the individuals to check and balance that mechanism. And that's exactly what we're doing on side proposition, Mr. Speaker. When those Supreme Court judges are not representing society in a proper level that the society deems it to be, we think we should check and balance that mechanism. And that's why we would rather give this to a national referendum, popular referendum, rather than those judges deciding on their own. But moreover, we think the problem here is that those decisions made by those people people, 9 people in US Supreme Court is not reflective of the society, it's not reflective of the social popular opinion. We, like again in the example of individual mandates, like interestingly, 5-4 decision was to say that individual mandates should be kept. It goes along with the principle of their constitution. But interestingly, according to Ipsos, like governmental organization that conducted the research towards the, like whether or not they like this and the citizens, 65% of the citizens like directly oppose this idea of individual mandate. This clearly shows that sometimes these courts are not reflective of the interest. Now let me directly like compare and contrast the benefits and the harms of yielding power to either the judges or the public. Like what Hannah in her extension wants to say was that better decision-making procedure is possible when we give power to court because they have the authority to solve the problem, and that like citizens, the direct involvement of the party is impossible in citizens. So even if you are not interested in gay rights movement, like you just go vote, like saying that gays are faggots and they don't deserve that right. We think this is ridiculous. When we compare these two values, as our member already told you, these 9 Supreme Court judges are probably the most in the not directly involved parties in making decision-making procedure, because we pointed to the fact that open government wonderfully told you about how sometimes these are politicized, Mr. Speaker. But moreover, we told you that the interpretation is lenient upon the elitist movement, Mr. Speaker. We think that the credibility is largely down on their side of the house, and that because those people are not directly involved. Like when we give this referendum to the vast majority of the population, we think this is better, because if you're not interested, most likely what will happen is that you don't go vote in the first place, because we include the parties and because we include the parties that are most directly involved in the decision-making procedure. Our model is better in opposing that authority in solving that problem. But moreover, we also told you in closing government that these judges lack accountability in terms of how they're appointed by the elitist people, not by the majority of the society, we think, Mr. Speaker. But lastly, in terms of this clash, we told you that constitution and the nature of law is static and inflexible to reflect the public opinion, the changes of society. That's why the responses to black right movement or gay right movement is simply late when you resort that mechanism to court, not on the majority matter. So thank you, sir. We think this direct contribution coming from closing government is super important in terms of how we say that the laws and the constitution are tautological and inflexible, and that's why in order to reflect the public opinion and better represent the society, which is the essence of democracy, we should go for this policy, this period.
Okay, when majority in the name of democracy makes a wrong decision, how do you ever change that decision?
Well, we have 2 responses. First of all, we think the likeliness of that happening is very low. But secondly, because of that side effect likeliness, we think this will induce government to promote more education for the society and the majority to increase their civic duties and increase the interpretation of their controversial mechanisms and controversial things in our society. Second point in my second clash in my speech regarding the minority right, we have 2 responses. Firstly, as we've given you continuously in our POIs and throughout speeches of the member, we told you that in most cases it was the court and the constitution that blocked the social minority right from being upheld. We told you examples of sexism, we told you examples of how black people were systematically oppressed and blocked, Mr. Speaker. We think the simple assumption saying that if majority are given the right to vote, they will automatically oppress minority does not stand when we look at the empirical evidence of history in today's debate. The second response to this, we think even if that is the case, we think using courts to enforce progressive measures when majority of the society do not want it is also dangerous, because the principle of democracy ultimately is through representation of what the society wants, and going through the popular, going through what the citizens want and society is moving towards, Mr. Speaker. So lastly, I'm going to talk about very quickly about the social ramifications of this policy. Firstly, the social ramification is that we solve the problem of political apathy, and that we increase the acceptance of the judicial system and judicial, acceptance of the judicial decisions. Firstly, as our opening government said, this encourages the debate and therefore increasing the access and exposure to the controversial measure and inform the population and inform the majority to have fruitful debate. But moreover, this incentivizes the government to further promote more education to make citizens be aware of their civic duties. Only when you are able to vote, only when women became able to vote and given voting rights were they interested in voting and interested in society matter in the first place, Mr. Speaker. This then wants to talk about how it can be manipulated by large corporations. Problematically, Hannah also accepted that if you have people and corporations that don't like gay movement, they're also also gay right lobbying power and lobbying movement. So we think there's a natural check and balance, but moreover, we think that the conflict that arises from this kind of like lack of this mechanism about how like black people are lynched and gay people are lynched is too devastating for us to simply condone in the status quo. Having all that established and fundamentally proud to propose.
Thank you very much for the speech. Now to close the debate, let's invite opposition speakers to the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I know that this has been a very confusing and messy debate. That's why I'm here to clear it up for you, and asking the two clashes, I'm going to explain to you this debate. The first idea that I'm going to tell you is about who has better legitimacy, who has better mandate. The second idea I'm going to be talking about is which decision-making process is better in terms of making those kind of changes that are necessary in our society. Before diving into those two clashes, one point of rebuttal I want to make. In engaging with our extension, what Junbin told us was the idea that the uninterested people simply won't vote, so it's not going to result in populism. And then he gave another idea in Jeesoo's extension in talking about, we think we're going to involve more debate and people becoming more interested in this kind of issue. We think this is a clear contradiction. We think this is like both benefits cannot happen under their logic, because if people are not interested, they won't be involved in that debate. Now, having cleared that up, I want to move directly into my first extension in talking about who has better mandate, who has better legitimacy in making this kind of changes. The idea that came from the opening government was this. We think that it's wrong that 9 random judges change what is really, really fundamental to you. We think that they seem to support the idea of direct democracy, where everything is decided upon a simple majority vote. Following their logic, politicians passing law in Congress is also wrong. They want to take down the whole system of indirect democracy. But we think that the current system of indirect democracy is fine, because indirect mandate is also a form of mandate, which was an idea that clearly came from my member. We think that there are 3 reasons for this. The first reason why mandate exists is because when we vote upon our presidents, we trust our presidents to make the right decision for us when they elect the kind of judges they want to elect. That's why we hand over a certain power that we have to them, which is the whole idea behind the social contract, right? But we think that the presidents will actually make those kind of right decisions, because they're also very, very subject, and they also are very conscious of the kind of support that they want, or legitimacy that they're going to get from their voters, from their citizens. But the second idea that we gave is that the check and balance already exists in the status quo to like wipe out those kind of, reflect those kind of interests and wants of different groups. We think that even among judges, this kind of interest differences exist. I'm going to explain more about this idea in a second. But my third reason why there is mandate is because is this. If you're really, really unhappy with the idea of the president picking your judges unilaterally, which we don't see any problem in, then simply elect your judges. We think this is not mutually exclusive from the whole, all 4 speeches that came from the government side. We think that's going to solve all the problems that they said as tackles for our side. But the second thing that the closing government said was that, we think that they said that the judges are really, really ill fit to make these kind of changes. This is not true for 4 reasons. First of all, due to development of technology, due to development of media, we think the judges are actually very, very in tight with what's happening in our society, what people want, those kind of interests or ideas of people. We think that's the idea that my member gave in her rebuttal. But secondly, we think that according to researches, the decisions that judges actually reach and the kind of public poll is actually very, very similar. We think this proves why judges are actually in touch with the society and what people want. But thirdly, we think that different judges actually from different background, and that's the reason why differences between judges is going to be able to reflect different values, because there are 9 judges to reflect those kind of differences that people have. For example, in the United States, the judge Anthony Scalia would be this judge that believes in originalism and is really, really conservative. Then you would have those more liberal judges to reflect that kind of view of those liberal people and to create a check and balance upon those kind of different judges, right? But the last idea that I want to talk about is because the judges actually have a lot of interest in doing what is right, what is just, and they're actually less susceptible to their own interest in the kind of changes that they're trying to bring about. We think that they're going to make less selfish judgments because they are like the calculus of the decision making that they're going to do is different. I'm going to talk more about this. But the kind of extension that Hyewon Rho gave you of this, the reason why legitimacy falls when people actually vote upon this kind of different things is because the people never, allowed other citizens to make those decisions for you. The reason why legitimacy stands on our side is because people actually mandated and gave mandate to that president or judge in the political system that exists in the status quo. They never engaged with this idea, so it stands. But the second question I want to move into is where that kind of, where decision-making process is going to better take place in terms of reaching those kind of different decisions. We think that the situation in this debate is a deadlock because leaving up to people isn't simply suddenly going to somehow make or solve a problem when it was never solved in the past. So we think that third party has to go in. I already proved to you why this third party of judges and this judicial system has enough justification and legitimacy. But we think that also in this debate there is a deadlock because Jeesoo gave this idea of does law change perception or does perception change law? We're actually here to solve that kind of deadlock. We think that this is not a black and white logic. We think that law and perception actually influence each other. But the question that we have to ask in this debate is what is the most effective and efficient way to bring about those kind of necessary changes that we really, really need in our society? The reason why it's never able to achieve those kind of changes under their model is because of populism and because of the power imbalance in collectivizing those ideas that we told you in our extension. We think what's going to happen under their model is now whenever there is a controversial issue, let's say like gay marriage, and let's say like 10% of the people support gay marriage, 50% of the people don't support it, and 40% are neutral. What's going to happen is, first of all, even according to simple math, everyone is going to know that the people that oppose gay marriage actually outnumber these minorities. But secondly, because these majority people have so much more power, in terms of materialistic and other terms, to create that kind of propaganda in the society to, persuade and sway those neutral people. We think they're going to have these malicious campaigns against the people in order to make things go their way. And we also think that it's going to be easier for these people to mobilize other citizens to vote for their side or not to participate in votes at all. It's what happened in the case of Junbin within Korea, right? We think in terms of these kind of cases, there is no point in having this kind of referendum at all. We think like the whole idea that the government is going to trying to go for actually false. But the last idea that I want to convey is the idea that people vote upon self-interest and what is good for that individual. But the thing is, this calculus itself is very wrong in a lot of the cases because it's based on simple idea of ignorance and false idea that, for example, in the case of gay marriage, when they support gay marriage, the value of their marriage is going to fall. We think that in states that actually legalized gay marriage, the divorce rate fell and the marriage rate went up. We think that this kind of idea of false ignorance and the idea that they're going to make a calculus depending on only their self-interest is what's the biggest problem in this situation. We think that the reason why judges are going to make decisions better is because their calculus is different. It's less self-interest oriented, but they have the sense of responsibility of justice because it's their job, it's what they're there for. But they also have a better stake in looking at the big picture instead of looking at only the kind of stakes that they have, only the interests that they have. But we also gave you the idea that judges actually know better because they were educated directly to carry out that kind of idea. The assumption coming from the government was that every citizen knows what's happening in every corner of the citizen. We also lastly gave you the idea why it's very, very wrong if the law fluctuates in the society depending on the move of what people want. We don't think law should be like this. We think there should be stability of the constitution. That's why we're very, very happy to oppose this motion.
Thank you.